Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much. My name is Namita. I'm an engagement manager with Zinnov, and today we're going to be running a virtual masterclass on vision and strategy for 2025. So just to give you a quick context, I think a lot of what we have been doing over the last 3 or 4 years is to be able to work with organizations on deciding what the India organization is going to stand for, right? And I think now as we approach. In fact, incidentally, this week is year two exactly, or since the pandemic hit us. This exactly 2 years ago was the first time we heard of lockdown coming in. And I think over the last 2 years, a lot of the constructs and the contexts within which we operate have changed, right? But against the background, and why I've chosen 2025 specifically is because while working with organizations, we realize that is just enough time to see your successes and outcomes from any initiative that you seed today within the organization, and really be able to follow through and act on a vision and persona that is specific to India, which basically boils down to being able to tell an India specific story. That is what we are assisting a lot of organizations with already. We've accumulated some amount of knowledge, a series of tools and frameworks that we've developed along the way that we thought it would be useful to maybe share with the larger ecosystem. And in many cases, I think what I'm trying to do today is also simplify the process for you, right? Because strategy 2025 seems like a very overwhelming word and construct. But the idea is to maybe break it down into a series of smaller steps for you so that at least at the very least, it's accessible. Which brings me to the agenda for today. I am going to quickly start with a small playbook in terms of how we do this and how we craft a lot of strategies for organizations. It is just a series of tools that I have used, or my team has used, or Zinnov has used in the formulation and implementation of a lot of strategies for GCoEs currently. The largest sort of market or geography we work with are India GCoEs, but in some cases we have worked with a couple of global locations, but run the same process pretty much, right? What's very exciting, I think, about today's session is we've got our partners Fitbots, who actually have an OKR software platform that they track, but they also have helped multiple organizations, startups, large organizations, etc., with adopting the OKR journey, not just as a checklist, but really being able to build a culture of OKRs within the organization as well. This includes Zinnov. They have been very, very instrumental on our journey in being able to create a culture of OKRs, a very strong culture of goal setting and accountability within Zinnov. And definitely recommended in terms of how much they've been able to see change for us as an organization. So I thought it would be a good idea to bring them on board and have them run a short, not so short, but a 1 hour plus session on how goal setting via OKRs really works and what is the framework that they have in place, what are some of the best practices they've observed, and what are some pitfalls that you need to be aware of. With that, we will have a closing note, but really it's the space for us to ask any questions, maybe questions aimed at us, which is Zinnov and Fitbots, but also questions aimed at the larger forum. Just to give you all some context, the rest of the attendees today, aside from the Zinnov team, are leaders who lead the India GCoE for the technology companies that are based here, as well as the heads of strategy and chief of staff, wherever they could make it. This session is going to be recorded because the quorum is quite large. And there will be a couple of exercises that both I and the Fitbots team will request you to do as we go along. Whether you choose to share, your work, whether you choose to share your point of view about your organization is completely at your discretion. We will not ask you to publicly speak up and share anything, but I do request that you come into this organization with at the very least, pen and paper, because I suspect that a lot of ideas are going to crop up as we move through the slides and the session that we have today for you. With that, let's get started. The way that I have structured this is that for the next 1 hour odd, I'm going to be taking you through a short sort of playbook on building a vision and strategy for 2025. Prashant, can you just confirm if you can see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Now, I cannot see the Q&A and the chat window just yet unless a question pops up. But please feel free to add your points of view, your opinions, any questions that you may have either for us or for the larger forum in the chat box and the Q&A window. And we will take it up as and when we sort of pace ourselves through the session.
Namita, one quick check.
Yeah, go ahead.
Since the leaders have the option of unmuting themselves and asking the question during the presentation, can they do that?
Yeah, with raised hands. What I will do is I'll also pause at regular intervals so we can do a quick Q&A.
Perfect, fantastic. Thanks.
Okay, awesome. So with that, let's get started. So what are we here to do today? I thought, hump day, middle of the week, I'd make it start off with a little humor so that, it's not too boring and it's not too dry. But what are we here to do today? I think, like I said, a lot of organizations and leaders realize that strategic planning can be a very overwhelming goal. But the idea is to really break it down and simplify it, right? And realize that it is not really as complex and we don't really need to over-engineer it as much as we think we do or as much as we usually do. Now, the way that, and a lot of what I'm going to be sharing derives from experiences either first-hand or secondary experiences of watching organizations define their strategy. But the typical iterative or stage-gated process that you use when you formulate your strategy is you start off with the design phase, right? Your design phase essentially constitutes identifying as an organization what your priorities are going to be, being able to break those down into a series of smaller action items and a smaller goal, so that you're tracking something over the long term, but it's broken up into a series of milestones over the course of time. Then you go into and you implement a lot of the checklist items as part of the goal setting process. And then eventually, about 6 months in, 9 months in, a year in, you keep iterating to understand if all of the initiatives are working, if you're on track to achieving most of the goals that you set out for yourself. And do you need to be able to revisit and redesign some of the initiatives and strategy that you had set out to achieve? Now, in an ideal world, in best case scenario, it follows a very sequential iterative process, but we know the reality looks a little bit different, right? You start off with an intent, you design a specific initiative, you set goals for it. You might go back to iterating it. In many cases, you implement something, you realize the goal setting was flawed, you come back to that, iterate again, design again, right? So the real world process looks extremely different, and we realize that a lot of organizations go back and forth due to multiple reasons in terms of being able to follow this particular flow for strategy design and implementation. So the idea is that we will walk you through some of the tools that we have used as an organization, and the hope is that we simplify it a little bit for you. We're able to work through some of the fogs that we know we have, and maybe also use this session as a session to brainstorm on a couple of challenges that you currently face and how we can derive on each other's experiences in order to be able to address that. But there's going to be two very distinct parts to the session itself today. The first part that I'm going to be covering is the identify and design phase, right? So how do you identify all of the things that the org needs to do? How do you prioritize on what's important? How do you overlay what global will immediately sign off for? And the second part of the session will be how do you go carrying about setting out goals for the initiatives, etc. And for this specifically, we're going to be using OKRs. So the first part will be done by me, just to reiterate. And the second part around the goal setting using OKRs as a framework will be done by the FitPods team. We have Vidya and Kashi who have come in from the FitPods team. I will probably give them some time towards the end of my session to introduce themselves. It's going to be a long one. It might get a little intensive, as we go into the session. So please feel free to move around, get coffees, teas, bio breaks, etc. As and when you need stretch breaks, as and when you see the need, right? But the request is that you stay right up till the end of the session, just to also learn from what other leaders have been experiencing. Couple of disclaimers before I get into it. We have assumed ceteris paribus. In an ideal state, all things remaining constant. Anything we've learned over the last 2 years has taught us otherwise. So I have not taken into account, or I'm assuming actually that the baseline factors like business continuity planning, etc., are already in place, because things like pandemics and wars are going to crop up and are going to take mind share for a lot of the leaders who are in the session today. But for the purpose of this session, we have also oversimplified a lot of the concepts, right? Part of it is because, it's very easy to guess from the work that we do which company we're probably doing it for, but also because I want to enable retention of a lot of the concepts that we have applied with organizations. So just bear with us. The concepts may seem extremely simple, but I'm 100% sure that once you take these concepts back into your organization to implement with your team, it is not really all roses, right? So I think I've oversimplified it in order to be able to clear a lot of the fluff and the fog around it. The idea is also not to make this workshop exhaustive. I realize that if I put down all the tools and frameworks that we use, it might just get actually overwhelming. The idea is to empower you all, right? The simplification is the empowerment. And just to call out that a lot of these tools that we use are just the tip of the iceberg. What we do in design versus what we do in implementation, we have learned from personal experience, are completely different things, and they're completely different monsters. So we just wanted to maybe break it up and I think be able to sort of create that clarity of thought and share our experience. Which brings me to step one. So I think let's talk about the design phase, right? The first thing you do is assess where you are currently. And I know a lot of leaders I've spoken to, I've personally worked with actually a lot of leaders in this room in order to be able to define where you stand currently. One of the big frameworks that we use and which contributes or is instrumental to the way Zinnov as an organization views and quickly tags organizations is GCoEs, is the maturity framework. The maturity framework reflects or mirrors the typical journey any GCoE takes in the ecosystem. The way that we have labeled stages is reflective of how a lot of global leaders also view offshore development centers, right? So you start off as an outpost. Essentially, you're just like a preferred sort of service provider. You work in a workforce augmentation style model, but there is very, very limited focus and emphasis on creating senior roles, on designing and architecting products and portfolios from India, etc. So you're essentially just like a support arm for the global organization. All of this is with the context of headquarters. So as you start off at outpost, you typically move into a satellite mode, satellite office mode, where you have independent sort of or discrete modules of a larger portfolio being developed from India. Typically, this is where your design and architectural talent starts maturing. You start contributing to larger parts of the greater product. And I think a lot of your nascent mechanisms include accessing the customer, your understanding of the business of the organization, etc. Then you move into complete development ownership, right, of the product or portfolio from India, which means your architecture is very, very well entrenched. The team in India also has a very well-established understanding of the customer. There's a strong connect with the customer. There's a strong connect to the business sitting across the globe, etc. But what is probably a little bit more nascent is product management and the most senior sort of decision-making roles in India, right? So budgetary ownership is still not a characteristic of Portfolio Hub. India is just known as a development hub for a lot of the work for the organization. And then finally, you have Transformation Hub, which is, well, the aspiration state. But the idea is that you have complete autonomy and decision-making on the products and portfolios that do sit out of India, or there is evidence of it. Architectural talent, product management talent, access to customer, strong sense of sales influences is already high. There could also be global change management initiatives that are being driven from the India. So for organizations where product ownership, for example, is not really an end goal or an outcome, you have global change management initiatives based out of India. This includes global roles. This includes structured innovation programs. This includes the presence of CXO level leaders here. Our first step when we work with any organization is to identify where in these 4 stages does an organization fall, right? Because one, what it does is it gives you a sense of where you are currently, but it also gives you a sense of realistically in the next 2 to 3 years in the short term, where can you hope to be, right? So what is a good end state for you? And the way that we do this is we look at about 6 overarching parameters or buckets of metrics, as we call them, in order to be able to arrive at the end state, right? So the first outcome is, of course, to understand where on that 4-stage map you lie. The second outcome is to come up with an exhaustive list of action items that the organization should be taking in order to be able to move to the next stage of maturity, right? So what is a realistic goal for you as an organization, or aspirational goal for you as an organization in the next 3 years by 2025? What is the exhaustive list of actions you will have to take as a company in order to be able to get there? Typically, our recommendations get bucketed into structural. So you want to look at structural aspects, you want to look at capability and culture led, which is your talent led aspects, and then you want to look at process and innovation led aspects, right? So the way that we bucket it is also by the stakeholder who's probably going to be owning it. And so this is the exhaustive checklist of action items. Now, as you create an exhaustive list, this has to be a no holds barred exercise, right? You do not want to stop at anything. Assume that there is no budget constraint, there is no constraint on hiring, on attrition, etc. In an ideal state, what are all of the things that you would be able to do, assuming you had all the resources at your disposal, in order to be able to do so, right? We will come to the prioritization part later in terms of how do you actually zero in on the initiatives that are going to have the maximum impact for you as an organization. But essentially, this is how you want to do it. The first step is to be able to identify, assuming no resource constraints, what are all of the things you would like to do or should be doing in order to get to the next stage of maturity. Okay, the next stage of anything in terms of the prioritization or defining an overarching vision for the India GCoE should be overlaying global priorities, right? I know I said no resource constraint, but let's be honest, in the real world, you do have a constraint on resources. And more often than not, your global sponsor is going to be the determinant of that for either your direct reporting leaders or the sponsor for the India organization. So the way that you want to, and there is a couple of ways that you can anchor this. One is you have one-on-one conversations with your bosses sitting at headquarters or other global locations. Try and understand what are their aspirations for the India organization. When we personally do this, and a lot of organizations request us to do this very simply because in many cases, we form the outside-in party. We're a neutral sort of third party to the organization as a whole. And we have noticed actually in multiple cases, global leaders are far more self-expressed with us because for us, it's a no-stakes thing. There's no risk of offending us. There's no risk of limiting our aspiration or dreams. So I think a lot of global leaders automatically come to us and say, hey, GCoEs have done something really, really well. And here's where I see uniquely positioned for India. But here's where I believe they're going to be struggling as an organization. And I may not buy into this as quickly, right? So we've had a series of conversations and we deploy what we call the perception index with a lot of organizations. What this is just a side-by-side comparison of what India leaders will be prioritizing versus what global leaders really want you to be focusing on. It also helps sometimes to get an external sounding board like an SME, a senior leader who's been in the industry for long, who's been through the same journey that you have and traversed that whole road already, get their perspective in terms of what did they learn from being able to do this firsthand. And what are some of the pitfalls that you need to be aware of, right? And finally, I think the first homework that we do is to be able to look for markers in annual reports or earning calls. Sounds simple enough, but a lot of the leaders that we interact with tend to miss this or sideline this in many cases for multiple reasons, right? So what I did was I had touched upon the last bit, which is looking through annual reports and earnings calls, right? And some of your best clues lie in that particular source of data. So I've put up here are samples of different organizations that have actually called out what their priorities are going to be for the org. And these have gone on to inform the India vision and persona for the GCoE, right? So one example of an enterprise software company, because we worked and spoke to this company very recently, is to be able to drive customer engagement through data. So digitalization of the entire customer experience, and generally sort of reiterate their products in order to improve customer experience overall. So that's a core focus for them. Another semiconductor organization is essentially looking at driving a culture of continuous innovation internally, as well as strengthening their technical talent pool and their technical capabilities, right? So The predictable cadence is because against the background of the recent flux that the organization went through, or the entire semiconductor chip industry has gone through in the last 2 years. But essentially, be able to build a strong pool of technical talent and be able to drive continuous innovation, both priorities which India can absolutely take up and contribute to and should inform the India vision for 2025. And then on the right, we have retail. All of this is public information. These are annual reports that these organizations have published. But from a retail experience, the whole concept of store experience, right? So seamlessness of customer experience. I think they look at omni-channel retail as a big focus area. I think they're looking at improving employee experience within the organization, just in the context of the hybrid workforce. Again, both initiatives that the India team can seed and drive. Which brings me to being able to define your vision for 2025. I think the core focus and the key question, and I'll pause here for 5 minutes, I'll take a couple of questions, but what I also invite all of you to do is just quickly put pen to paper and decide or take a quick shot at what will the India organization stand for in 2025. What is the purpose? What is the reason you exist? And how do you see this translating into a goal in the next 2 to 3 years? I'll just let this stay here, and then I'll move on to a couple of the priorities that we've seen other India GCoEs sort of take up. But let me just take up a couple of questions. So Ravi is asking if we will be sharing the slides. Yes, Ravi, we will be sharing. This will be public, actually. Whether you are a member or a non-member of GAP, which is the accelerator platform that I'm a part of, we will be sharing these slides. I think so. Rangesh, do you all want to unmute yourself? Rangesh from LAM, do you quickly want to unmute yourself and ask the question, or should I just go ahead and paraphrase it or state it?
Actually, yeah, I didn't have a question per se, but a comment, which was that I don't see as any one state as mutually exclusive.
Sure.
Is what I wanted to say, because at one point in time, we have an obligation to support the company in staff augmentation and continue to do that. And in another part of the business, we should be able to be a transformation hub. So I don't see those as mutually exclusive.
Absolutely. No, you're right. I think absolutely. A certain BU or a product team or a portfolio team could be far ahead on the maturity versus others. And you're right, there is disparity in many of the exercises that we run, where you see these 4 states where there's a massive gap in the BU's maturity. I think the key thing is to ride on the success and build a business case so that you push everyone forward, right? So you've seen.
Actually, we could do that by design. No, I'm actually saying by design that we will choose in some areas not to be a transformation hub. In other areas, so we don't have to push everybody to there. Is what is the point I was trying. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think that kind of segues into my prioritization as well. So we will sort of come back to this. I think to the question that Subhi had around how do you generalize? Yeah, Subhi, do you quickly just want to state your sort of POV and then I'll qualify it?
Sure. So I think, as Rangesh said, as Savik Kiran said, everybody says, right? So you're going to have products in different levels of maturity, right? So we have to align that with the organizational objective. And 2, as Rangesh also said, right, we'll have many COEs in the world. We cannot say India is the only COE and will do everything, right? So that also doesn't work overall. So then when we do and assess ourselves as a COE in the maturity scale that you've made, if I have products across individually in different states, how do you say as a COE, where am I? And that's my, biggest challenge that I have, because if I say products A and B are on sales and revenue as well as this, but product B, E, F are in the outpost. So does the COE is an outpost somewhere else?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of ways that we look at it, Subhi, to answer your question. I think the first thing is, yes, we will take an assessment of every single business unit within the GCoE. What we will then do is, I don't think our recommendations come from how can the business units improve. Our recommendations typically come from, where would you as an organization like to be, right? So when we speak to every business unit, the idea is what is your aspiration as a business unit? So there's a set of recommendations just which the BU will have to take up and implement. But then there is a larger vision that probably the India leader and the strategy office is working towards, right? And this is a first-hand experience. For example, one of the organizations that we are working with, they have operations, they have technology teams, they have analytics teams, etc. But they are very clear that they want to be the digital hub for the org, right? So there's a set of action items that we believe the BU will take in order to get to a certain aspiration state in the short to medium term. But in order to achieve the larger vision for India, there are going to be a certain prioritized set of work streams. One is you can't solve for every business unit. Two is you can't generalize for the GCoE as a whole. Three is also that you can't do 25 things as an organization. What are the 5 things that are going to have the greatest impact and represent the least effort in terms of seeking spends and buying from global leaders is what we look at, right? So I think couple of things where we troubleshoot with leaders in order to be able to look at the action items. The scoring ultimately is just a number. We've not seen a lot of global leaders also really buy into it or retain it. I think what they're more interested in is give me absolute direction in terms of what I need to invest in as a company. And so that's where our prioritization and our vision statement kind of comes in. Does that sort of answer the question?
It kind of answers the question that, yeah. And then I think the key is not to read too much into like, where does the GCoE stand in the maturity model?
Yeah. I think funnily enough, a lot of leaders have also said, just err on the side of caution, put us slightly lower than you would believe, because I want to be able to build a business case for certain things from India, right? So we've also seen evidence of that, but you're absolutely right. I don't think anybody retains the numbers. You just generally map where you want to be. And that seems to be a greater sort of push to build a business case for. So, which brings me to, I don't know if y'all want to put down in the chat box. Yes, so Prem to answer, sorry, before I move on, Prem to answer your question, yes, we, in fact, it's a stage gate within all the assessments that we do, which is what I called out earlier on the Global Leader Perception Index. Over the last 2-3 years, for every assessment that we've done, we, at the request of the India leadership only, we have also spoken to global to map their sense of where India is at. So a lot of this is also informed of what global leaders want from the site. Any other questions? Anything else? Any observations from the attendees here? Quite a few folks come in. So
Namita, this is Prem. So one of the big challenges that so I worked in multiple CoE organizations like where I am today. The challenge comes in with the really complex matrixed organization. Right? We are not reporting to, it's multiple businesses in I'm sure everybody's going through the same thing here. And then you have also the reporting structures which are across multiple locations and functions. One of the key learnings that at least Ramani, my colleague, is also in this call here from VMware. We have been in the process of doing exactly the same thing of looking at, we have done the basics. Now we want to look at the next 3 years horizon, taking the organization to the next level, because we are really a big center for the company here. It'd be great to learn from some of the peer group companies or the leaders here, or from your own expertise and experience. How do you build that 3-year horizon, keeping all the complexities around internally, externally, and what are a couple of key levers that needs to be in place to make this a reality? Otherwise, you can go back and forth multiple times, and there's always big changes that come around. But how do you keep some of the basic things constant to really see? Because transformation is great when it comes to, and the challenge is we don't want it to be transformational through the year, every year for multiple years. There has to be some consistency, stability for people to see that what you transformed, you need to see some outcome coming in. Yeah. Do you see some of those experiences coming in from your conversations?
No, absolutely. And I think the one thing, I'll just give one maybe comment here while I think through it and open it up for the audience. But the one thing that has absolutely helped a lot of India GCoEs is to enlist a sponsor at global, right? Someone who typically sits in the CXO suite of leadership, who is constantly the voice of reason for the India leaders, but is also the champion for the India vision with the larger global council of leaders, right? The ones who are ultimately going to buy in. So there's an India sponsor and an India champion who sits at headquarters. And I think that a lot of organizations have actively gone out and enlisted the help of. But I'll also check with the other leaders if they have anything to add to this.
Probably, Namita, I can comment.
Sure,
this is a transformational journey, right? All the companies actually go through this kind of a scenario in the last 1 year, 10 years, 20 years, however they had been operating.
Yeah.
Having a seat on the CXO's forum is absolutely a must. That is how we'll be in a position to actually drive the agenda locally. But one of the things probably what we have done is that take a look into the company's objectives, long-term horizon, and the annual report is a great starting place to understand. And take a look into where are all the competencies that are already there existing, because no corporation wants to duplicate those CoEs establishment once again. So we need to actually identify which of the CoEs are important for the organization and that are not still matured and they are emerging. And those are the kind of the skills that we might be in a position to actually raise the hand and says that these are the things that are essential for the future. And these are the things that we can actually do it for the reasons A, B, C, D, and go start doing some marketing and branding of what we are trying to do. And once you set the goal there, make sure that the resources are allocated, the people are allocated, time is allocated, and do a little bit of a branding as well, because people tend to forget. Do a little bit of a marketing globally as well, because people tend to forget. And unfortunately, most of the GCCs are operating in the India remotely out of their parent organization. So out of sight is out of mind. So we need to continue to iterate and continue to show the impact that's being done into the businesses. So catch a CoE, understand a quick success story, and then once you put that, continue to advertise.
So you're saying piggyback on the success of your more mature teams and your early wins in order to build a case for other initiatives that you want to see.
Absolutely. I mean, once the ball gets rolling, once the first tire of the car moves, the remaining 3 tires will slowly start moving.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the interesting points that you called out was, building that internal brand, right? And so there's one branding that you do externally as an employer. There's, I think, another branding that needs to be done internally as a site of choice for global, right? And so I think this is all of this feeds into that ultimately. All of this feeds into the vision for India, the series of initiatives, the governance structures, the goals that you set for yourself, all ultimately feed into a persona, like a document, like a charter document for the India organization. And that's really the win. But you're absolutely right. And a great call out that Prakash just made, I think, is being able to create an internal brand from India to the globe in terms of what you will stand for, because it's very, very obvious that by 2025, you're not going to be able to solve all the problems of the organization. There are these certain, structures and complexities that you have to navigate, just by virtue of how your org is structured, just by virtue of distance from the customer, end customer, etc. I think it also helps to talk to other more mature organizations that have, like I called out, already sort of traversed this journey, right? So we have seen a lot of value personally, and this is, I think, what Zinnov also does best, is we go to the companies that have done this well. We get their perspective on how they were able to do it, just so organizations that are just starting out on that journey don't traverse and reinvent the wheel, in a sense, right? So I think it's also important as you list out these action items, as you talk about, okay, how do I get a sponsor within the CXO Council? How do I, brand myself? What is a good message to take to the global organization, etc.? It's important to also understand from peer companies that have already done this and done this well. Yes, Stevie, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, just to add here, a few more things that we've been able to do here. One is we've been very deliberate about the talent, actually. And I think that's one thing that I'm seeing everything else equal. The whole element of building the right talent. So we have invested not just in engineering and hiring the senior architects, but also grooming them. But we have a full-fledged design team, user experience team, more than a couple of hundred product managers. So I think being able to really build the entire intact team is something that we have been very conscious about. So that's the first thing. Second thing has been really in terms of aligning all the initiatives, the center-wide initiatives to the high-level goals. So for example, for us, Suresh gives the overall global tech strategy and kind of making sure that we are aligned to them. The third thing is a very subtle shift that has happened to us in the last couple of years, which is like we were actually in my role, whenever we were designing a lot of programs, we were doing India first, and then the focus has really shifted for us that we are consciously saying that it's not India first because we have proven ourselves. So we are saying every program by design is being built for the global tech. We are not very narrow in our thinking in terms of saying that it should only be serving India interest. It should be serving the global tech interest. So the default state of program vision has really become that, hey, if I'm designing something, is it really serving my global interest there? And the fourth point I want to just add there, which is a journey in progress for us. I won't say that it is the done deal, which is. And it's been around, like I've been in GCCs in Bangalore last 25 years, and I've seen that I think we have an inherent strength here as the GCCs here, which is like there's the only place in any company, any of us here on this call or outside, where all the teams, all the functions, all the product groups, all the pillars come together under one roof. And I think the biggest value we can create is not in execution and delivery, because that's table stakes, but really in terms of the leverage, in terms of inner sourcing, in terms of being able to cross-pollinate some of the best practices and what have you. So I think that really is to me, the next level of really nirvana, because you are actually able to stitch the dots together, which even at the headquarters, the companies are kind of into their own siloed mode. And I think that's where I think we can add a lot of value. So those are a few things that I thought I'll just share here, Namita.
Yeah, super call out, I think, TV. I think the idea that India is a microcosm and represents like a smaller mirror of the global organization, with almost every portfolio product team represented here, is absolutely makes it the perfect test bed. And a lot of other ODCs don't have this benefit. So that's a great call out. Oops, I just saw all the raised hands. I'm so sorry. So we'll go one by one. So Ravi, NetApp, do you want to talk about?
Yeah, firstly, I think TV said some really very insightful things, and I have a dozen more questions, but I'll come back in line. I just wanted to kind of make one observation as we look at the maturity level.
Yeah.
And we've been discussing it. Different groups have different maturity levels. We also talk about having a seat at the table at the CEO staff. I think it's also important to recognize that the folks that are running the more mature groups in the India center are also a very heavy source of influence when you want to go reach out into the, into the corporate center of focus. So just, dealing with teams have different maturity, right? So you can pick somebody that's already successful. I also think, in terms of figuring out where the maturity really is, or assessing maturity in organizations, if you have a seat at the table when change is being driven, or if you are at the table and driving the change, I think that's the real litmus test of whether you really have matured to the level where the business is anchored in India, right? And I think those are the powerful leaders that we can lean on even internally in the organization.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think they become sort of role models for the larger organization. And as long as they stay at the India site, it becomes very relatable, and you sort of start seeing the other business units become more aspirational. But I think what a lot of organizations also have struggled with is, how do you make that senior role and that senior decision maker sit here, right? And not the automatic choice be that they don't ship them off to global. But I absolutely take your point. It's great to have that aspiration and end state set for the larger organization vis-a-vis the more mature leaders and business units.
Can I just ask one question of TV, because he was so insightful in the way he said it. And I'm wondering, is it different for Walmart in a sense that is Walmart in India a lot more mature than Walmart everywhere else in the world? Because the kind of influence he talked about, I think, is actually worthy of aspiring to for the rest of us.
Yes, TV, just maybe to paraphrase that, what has worked for you as an organization to get buy-in so quickly from the globe? And then I'll move on to Sonal.
Sure, I'll just take a minute. So thanks, Ravi, and happy to have a offline on this one. But I think in the last 3 years, I've been here only for 2.5 years, and probably you know Hari as well, and Hari has been here a little longer than that. And I think it's been a very conscious call for us to really invest in building the right kind of a talent there. I'll be very honest there. Before I joined Walmart, I didn't know that there was a Walmart in Bangalore. I've been here all my life, but I've not really known it. So without any prejudice, I don't think we really did that. But then we've done a bunch of things there which has really given us, whether it's doing a global conference where we are able to get people, our CEO Doug, to really come and bless the conference, or doing technical blogs, bunch of other things there. So it has been a painstaking process through the last 3 years, but I think we have come to the point where we don't have to really prove our credentials, and it's like the tail is wagging the dog sort of a thing.
Good. Thank you.
So Sonal from
Swissre, yeah. I have a comment and a question, and I think the previous speakers kind of alluded to that. While I totally agree, right, with the whole aspiration to grow and become what we want to become, I think what's becoming at least evident to us internally is the fact that we are going to have to play as one. India cannot continue sticking out like a sore thumb, having a separate agenda and constantly marketing itself, while the rest of the organization is not necessarily out there. So I guess two things that have become a bit more and more apparent over the years. One is being able to really say what is the impact we can create in the language of the strategic priorities that the organization have set out, not 2 levels below, but really be able to speak to the Swiss Re strategy, if I may, and measure it with everything that we do from India, so that whole impact is a bit more visible. The second is really this, right, which is to say, how do we play as one and not stick out like we have a separate agenda running at a separate pace, which we really do, but somehow, working with the larger organization, other GCCs that exist in our ecosystem. And that's been a bit of a shift over the last few years. That is the comment part. The question to you, Namita, is you mentioned that for some of these projects that you do with companies, not only do you speak to the India team to understand their aspirations, but you also speak to global partners and leaders to understand what their aspirations of the India setup would be. Yeah. Have you ever, encountered a dissonance in the level of aspiration that the India team has versus, the global team has a vision for India for, or do you generally see it similar? And if there is a dissonance, what have you seen companies on the ground do?
Yeah, so about 50% of the cases, we see a clear dissonance in terms of what India wants versus what global would like India to do. It's a half and half scenario. I think the areas where we see the globe sort of be a little bit reluctant is, when we say customer context or sort of be able to access the business end users, etc. I think a lot of organizations generally, it's not that they don't want to do it, it's just even the global leaders have no idea of how to solve the problem, right? So then we have to work with companies in order to say, hey, like being present physically with the customer may not be the only way to understand the customer. And so we have to do that whole sensitization. But I think what the global leaders generally struggle to grasp or are not really sensitive about with India is the flux in the talent ecosystem itself. I don't think they necessarily understand 3-month notice periods, the willingness of India talent to move much faster, your competition coming from unlikely sources like the whole startup ecosystem, etc., because I think the way that we're constructed, where there are hubs of talent in India versus in like the more developed regions, it's fairly spread out. So I think these are things that global leaders don't really understand or are not extremely sort of informed or sensitive about, right? So they're like, why does it take me 3 months to hire one person? Why are women leaving because they want to get married? How is this, an sort of acceptable reason? And after all of that training and investment we've made in people and created a strong pool of technical talent. That's one. I think the other thing that we constantly hear from global leaders is not seeing enough of an action plan. So I think when we speak to them, they say we're absolutely happy to invest in specific initiatives. We agree there needs to be ecosystem collaboration. We agree there needs to be a succession pipeline planning of senior leadership. But we have not seen a convincing blueprint India has brought to us on how they plan to get there. And what are some of the goals? What are some of the milestones that they will take, right? The other point that you called out yourself, I think, is speaking the same language. So the kind of KPIs or metrics or OKRs even, OKRs actually solve for that, but KPIs that the India team is holding itself accountable to versus what speaking the same language is what global would like India to hold itself accountable to. So three broad areas where we seem to put in more effort to bring the story together.
Thank you, Namita.
I'll quickly, Anjani from eVestnet, Yodli. InvestNet, sorry.
So, Namita, basically a couple of points and a couple of things that I have seen.
Yeah.
Number one, I think, looking at your phases of, how do we grow from one level to another. So one thing that we created in terms of, creating a product team here is we first started creating a team B. They have the product owners there and we say, okay, fine, you know what, we'll get you the next level product team here. They can help you do your user stories and then slowly, subtly increase the talent of the team so that then they start seeing them as partners. And then suddenly there's a realization that, wow, India product managers are also equally good, right? And the other thing that we did was create a very strong leadership team. Even though maybe, at the initial level, it was not required to get such senior folks, but bring the senior folks so that they, going back to what Sonal was saying, speak the same language and talk at the same level. Yeah. That said, there's one thing that sort of in the last forum, Pari was mentioning that, most of you must have had a new boss by now because there's so much of change happening around. And constantly needing to, going back to TV's words, proving your credentials. Constantly trying to say that, oh, by the way, there is some guy who comes in there who doesn't understand India. And then you're wondering, you're again restarting your story all over again. So I think lots of companies are in this level, including mine, where we need to figure how do we quickly jump over from this stage to the next stage wherein you don't need to prove your credentials. It's already table stakes. And now you talk about, what more can I do? What is the biggest value add that I can do? So that is where I was thinking, this cross-pollination is where hopefully it'll help that we all learn from each other and jump to the stage wherein we don't need to keep proving what we are.
Yeah, I absolutely hear you, Anjani. And I think the idea of this session is that at least up until 2025, you have this value proposition document created and ready. So irrespective of the leaders that come and go, in fact, even your talent within India coming and going, the end game is always in sight, right? And it is something that you will constantly fall back on. It helps to put it down in writing, create a document that gets widely shared within the organization, and accordingly, I think to Prakash's earlier point, be able to create that internal brand for the organization. But it just helps to put it down in writing and set the vision and overarching sort of themes for 2025. So so your eye is on the prize, irrespective of who comes in. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, awesome. So we'll quickly move on because I do want to give Fitbots also adequate time. So we stopped here. I don't know how many of you have, maybe actually put pen to paper and define this, but I think the key takeaway from this is being able to define what is the reason you exist and what as an organization will you stand for in 2025. This is what we are working with, first defining with a lot of companies, right? With a lot of GCoEs. And actually, here are a few samples. I think you all called this out sporadically in bits and pieces over the last 10, 15 odd minutes of conversation. But essentially, a couple of them, the standard ones, of course, tend to be end-to-end product and P&L and portfolio ownership. Can we be the hub for AI/ML ownership for India, right? So a lot of, for the globe, sorry. So a lot of organizations are also exploring, net new skill sets where the entire organization is at zero. You have to build these skill sets out from scratch for the globe as a whole. Can India really lead the charge in that? So there's product as well as CoEs, which is centers of excellence or centers of capabilities that are being driven end to end by India. And specifically what the India leaders and their chiefs of staff or heads of strategy are working towards. Another set of organizations are looking at digital hub for the globe. They realize that the way that they're structured, so a lot of the company that we are working with is a legacy sort of industry, right? It's your typical sort of insurance organization. You have partners, you have agents, etc., etc., and they realize that they will not be as proximate to the customer as they would like, and that's going to be a much bigger mountain to climb. So portfolio ownership may not be the most viable, or even if it is, it becomes a BU level agenda. So the org as a whole is looking at becoming a digital hub for the global organization, and this is the vision statement that they have created sort of for themselves. Any initiatives or activities, and as I go along in this slide, I'm going to be focusing on this one example because it's the most recent one that we've done. Any initiative that the India team sort of signs up for will directly be taken through the lens of, does this contribute to our digital agenda? Yes, no. If no, then we sort of deprioritize it or reallocate it to a different business unit or a leader. Then there are companies that are looking at access to emerging markets, right? So a lot of engineering, industrial product companies looking at and I think companies, especially like that have been in the industrial space where they're seeing a flat line in terms of the growth coming from the developed markets, are now increasingly seeing that by 2025, can I fundamentally shift the pie chart of revenue to be able to account for greater share of revenues coming from high growth regions for the globe. I think multiple folks called it out, but yeah, I think succession planning and global roles from India. So it's a strong leadership pipeline. The key question that you want to answer here is, can India be the next choice for a lot of leaders who may or may not be leaving from the headquarters? I don't know how many of you are aware, I'm sure a lot of you are. Jack Welch has this concept of blue bus test, where he talks about if your boss was crossing the road, very sort of dark, so just bear with me. If your boss was crossing the road and was hit by a blue bus and needed to be replaced the next day, do you have adequate people, within your pool who will be able to do that? So have you as a leader also created your next in line folks, and have you adequately equipped them to take on the role almost immediately, right? So he used to use this as a litmus test within GE in order to be able to look at the pipeline of leadership that the organization was creating. Some form of that, we believe, is going to have to be created from India, very simply because as maturity goes up, as your talent starts looking for role models to look up to locally, you are going to have to create these role models for them to aspire up to, right? And they will have to be based from here, as opposed to companies that were operating 10, 15 years ago, automatically shipping leaders to headquarters or global locations the moment they hit a certain stage of maturity. The other big focus, of course, is hub for innovation. So I think a lot of innovation-led change management, global initiatives being seeded at India and being taken to the globe. We've seen multiple initiatives and evidence of this, but just some sample statements that leaders have sort of come up with on the fly when we've been working with them. Now comes, how do you prioritize what's important, right? So you know all of the things you need to do as a company. You know your overarching vision statement. Realistically, there are resource constraints. Realistically, you don't have the time to do 25 things. So how do you then focus on the 4 or 5 things that would contribute the greatest to organizational impact, while also not, meaning you don't have to reinvent the wheel too much or seed something from scratch if it's not needed, but really give you the kind of impact that you're looking for the org, right? So, which brings me to our next tool about being able to prioritize. Very, very, very simplified version of what we actually do. But essentially, you want to look at 2 parameters. You want to look at the impact a specific workstream or initiative has, and you want to look at the effort it takes to implement it, right? Anything that is high effort, but also high impact forms the larger long-term charter, something you should be looking at post, let's say, 2023, second half onwards, right? Because there is a certain aspect around resourcing, around program management, CapEx, OpEx, infrastructure spend that is required in order to be able to get that initiative up and running. But anything that is high impact and low effort should be something you immediately get started on. right? So these, any initiatives that fall in this quadrant, the bottom right quadrant, is what forms your charter priorities for the next 18 months. And anything that is low impact and low effort, ideally repurpose, take a decision on whether you need it at all. Anything on the left-hand side of the graph. Maybe it's something that has a high impact at a BU level, right? Maybe the product team or the business unit or the portfolio team itself needs it, but you don't need to follow through on it as part of the larger site charter. You just need to track progress at the business unit level. So if that is the case, then repurpose the initiative so that it is governed by a BU leader and not necessarily by the strategy office and the site leader directly. Initiatives that are high effort and low impact obviously will have to be discarded, and this is really a no-brainer. So automatically what happens is you get a series of 4 or 5 things that tend to figure out on top. Amongst those 4 to 6 things that tend to come on the right-hand side of the graph, you are also able to accordingly create a milestone map depending on how much effort it is going to take for you. So let's quickly break this down, right? And I've taken an example of a company we did this for. Again, I've simplified this, but the idea or the larger vision statement that the leader explicitly called out to us was to be able to become a digital hub for the global organization or for the parent organization. So we did a sort of run with them. We've done it over multiple workshops with them, but we looked at 2 things. We looked at effort and impact. Within impact, we tried to understand every single initiative. How does it, so there's 2 anchors for digital, right? There's the digitalization of employee experience and the digitization of customer experience. Every single initiative was sent through the lens of how it contributes to these 2 anchors for the organization. Additionally, were there other payoffs that we weren't paying attention to? Was there an improvement in possibly the brand perception? Was it enabling better, or do we believe it would enable better retention and employee experience for the current pool that was sitting in the India teams? Did it also in some form shape the top line or the bottom line for the organization? And very importantly, did it have the potential to become a global change management program? Was it something India could pilot and test here, to TV's earlier point, and then take it to the globe, right? So because India already represented a mirror microcosm of the larger global org. So we ran every single initiative through this lens. What we also additionally looked at was effort is fairly straightforward. Is this something that has already been seeded? If yes, is there a need for a dedicated program management, and is the current team not being able to double hat, etc.? Do you need dedicated tools, technology, physical spaces for this initiative to actually show the first successes or early signs of success? Is there a dependence on external partners and vendors that will exclusively and solely be managed by the India team? And is there a need for net new capabilities that are not currently present at the organization? So what we then did was we ran every initiative through the lens, and we came up with the series of top 4 or 5 things that the organization needs to focus on. And this forms their charter. I paraphrased a lot of what they have put down, but this forms the core tenets of their strategy for 2025. They have defined that they will be an automation COE and probably look at analytics or AI/ML COE from India to the globe. They will also look at a structured innovation framework because they've seeded a new initiative, but it has not shown the signs that or early success that they were hoping it would. And it's been in existence for about 8 months now. They're also going to be looking at digitizing a lot of legacy services and processes for multiple BUs. This includes HR. So HR will have the greatest role to play. They're looking at a lot of digitization of talent acquisition, digitization of the way benefits are dispensed, etc. But there's also a customer-facing business unit that's going to be looking at digitizing employee experience for the previous part, but digitizing the customer experience. So they're looking at chatbots, they're looking at health coaches, they're looking at an app-based decision-making for, which policy to buy, etc. That is being driven from the India org. I think they're also leaning into this whole hybrid workforce model, and therefore they're going to be looking at digital tools to, improve the employee experience within the GCoE. One thing that they did not look at that we sort of said would have to be a focus, especially if they're looking at customer-centric digital transformation, is customer centricity as a culture and as a set of programs that they will have to drive. So that's an additional tenet that has now gotten added to their 2025 strategy. Now what they do from here is they look at each initiative, they break it down into a series of smaller activities, set goals around it, create a governance structure in terms of what business unit will play what role, which leaders will own it, which leaders will be responsible for implementation, and which will just be informed. What are some key success factors? And this is where the outside-in perspective formed a big part of their strategy definition is what have they learned from peers that they need to be aware of, right? And then finally create a target state for 2025. So if I say structured innovation framework, they already have a full-fledged accelerator program or at least 3 or 4 startups that they've partnered with in the long run. They've already looked at multiple proofs of concept being adopted into the product roadmap. And so we had to make sure and iterate that it spoke the same language as what global was looking for and measuring when it came to innovation. So I'll pause here because this was pretty much the last thing that I wanted to cover as a stage gate. I think I have maybe 5 more minutes worth of talking to do, and I will hand it over to the FitBots team. But pause here for any questions, thoughts, anything else we need to be aware of when we're doing this exercise with companies. I'm just going to assume that I did a good job. But if you all want, I'm also available, post the session, of course, to do any kind of brainstorming, answer any clarifications, take feedback, etc.
Namita, this is Anamika. I thought I'll just chime in.
Yes, go ahead, Anamika. Sorry, I see you raised your hand as well. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so, the goal setting of 2025, as a strategy head here, even that's the question which we are asking ourselves, that what should be our goal in 2025 when the state is so dynamic across globally? So many things are happening. Just yesterday, we were evaluating the macro dynamics, and there are discussions coming up that now regionalization is becoming very important. Then the second area, which is becoming really at the macro level, they are talking about, with the Ukraine, there's also a sense that there will be an expectation that the recession may be hitting us. The third is also when we're talking about India to the globe, India ecosystem is also shifting its gears, and a lot is happening across whether we are providing a competitive advantages versus what the aspiration will be of the global organization. Then the organization shifts are happening. The organization themselves, the people are changing. The ones who used to take decisions took it in a particular way. Today, with the future of work, being so agile, things are changing. So why I wanted to bring this, I would say the world was that this is a VUCA world, and things are changing so fast, so quickly that. First of all, we had an issue of 10,000 feet syndrome that, the India organization has been very away from the headquarters, and we are always trying to build credibility and, cross those miles. Now, with the variations happening at the global level, how do you think in your, consideration, we can, bridge the gap and still be focused on the goals? Because what is going to happen in 2025 is becoming, if I may say, more hazy than ever before.
So I'll do my best to answer that, Anamika, but I think the next session really does cover this and what the FitBots team and why we use OKRs as a framework sort of touches upon this. Couple of things. I think never lose your sight on the end goal, right? Your target state in 2025 should not shift, right? While your goal setting frameworks and why we're such big fans of OKRs is because they allow for that flexibility and agility to switch up your short-term milestones and your short-term goals. You kind of revisit it every 90 days. You look at, okay, what's working, what's not working, pivot quickly, etc. But you never ever lose sight of the end game, right? Where do you hope to be in 2025? Even in a VUCA world, I still want a global CXO role to be based out of India. And it is extremely aspirational, but I want to work towards that, right? I'd like one global change management initiative completely seeded and driven from here. I'd like one P&L owned end-to-end from the India organization. Those don't shift. What shifts is the smaller milestones in order to get there, right? So I think adopt a goal-setting framework that allows for flexibility. revisit it often, right? Revisit it every 90 days. Make sure it cascades. It is a cascadable framework in the sense that it is something that even your next level leadership can and your middle level leadership can pick up and run with, and you are not really required to handhold. And I know this struggle exists with roles such as yours, your heads of strategy and chiefs of staff. Majorly, the major load is on goal setting and tracking. But you have to adopt a framework that allows for flexibility, frequency to revisit it often, and I think should be able to cascade. And I think that is why for us OKRs have worked. But a lot of your questions, Anamika, will also get answered as part of the next session that we have. Just very quickly before I hand it over to Vidya and Kashi, I think the third thing that we do with companies is actually implementation. And I know that a lot of what I said looks very different when you actually put when rubber meets road, right? So we also kind of have looked at tools that we have found valuable, and these will be the focus of my next session. So think of these as a Vision 101, like a series of sessions and curriculum-led sort of structure that I'm going to be adopting going forward for the rest of the year. But essentially touch upon each of these and how they have helped us when it comes to actual implementation with organizations. Just quickly, I'll take 2 minutes on this slide, not more than that, I promise. A lot of what I shared with you is from our first-hand experience of working with organizations on designing and implementing site strategy. It is now a full-fledged offering called Strategy and Ops. We are basically looking at 3 distinct phases, like I called out. We look at current capability assessment, we look at blueprint creation and implementation. If you are interested and if you'd like to get in touch with us, maybe even run what I just did as a workshop with your folks internally, we'd be more than happy to do that. But we offer, what we're essentially solving for is flexibility. We offer either end-to-end support right from the design to the implement and iterate stages, or we can just come in for the first bit, right? We just come in for the capability assessment and the goal setting and then let you sort of run with it. Or we just come in and assist you with the implementation support. So we call it, yes, go ahead, Prashant.
So Namita, this is a good one. Just want to check with you, typically when you run these workshops, who all is kind of, involved in that? I'm asking this question because we designed our vision and strategy a couple of years back, and it was a long exercise, right? Not just to create it, but then to kind of get validation from global stakeholders, make sure they are bought into our vision and kind of, taking the larger organization along. So it's not something that we can set alone, in our kind of, ecosystem, but requires that global input as well, right?
Yeah. So global leaders are a part of this. So we typically give them context. We brief them on what we're trying to do. We get a first point of view from India, use again another workshop with global leaders to validate, plus have an additional workshop with the next in line leadership. So your BU and product or portfolio leader level and all your functional leaders also come in and sort of are sounding boards to make sure that everybody's bought in. The idea is also so that everybody's bought into the strategy itself and are aligned on the goals that we're going to be working towards. So 3 levels, of course, the India site leadership team and the strategy head, the global leaders from a validation perspective, and the next in line leaders from a bottom up sort of building perspective. All of them, and the workshop also is, I say workshop, but it's a series of workshops that we run.
Got it. Makes sense.
Okay. Super. So I think that's pretty much it. Any questions, any clarifications you have, please do reach out to me. I will also be on the chat, maybe answering one-off questions as and when. But yeah, I'd like to hand it over to Vidya and Kashi from FitBox.